welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Rich. Rich, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. Rich has been on many a times, people listening. I would recommend going back to earlier episodes of Rich. Our first discussion, we were talking about Roger Craig and the Rambler station wagon. We've talked a lot about Dallas politics. We've talked a lot about, we had one conversation about UFOs. We had a conversation with Joe Green. Many conversations you were involved in about the JFK assassination. I do respect your work. I do respect your opinion. I think through the years, things you have previously told me, like I said with Joe Green, I had to go back and try and find sources for things. But I've also noticed through our conversations, you've opened up the door a little bit more to the wacky and kooky things about the JFK assassination, such as the pool of blood in Dealey Plaza. You never mentioned the pool of blood in Dealey Plaza to me before. It took like our fifth conversation for that to finally come out, and we still don't know what the hell is going on with that thing. But do you mind introducing yourself to everyone out there listening, just so they can get a background of who you are?
I'm Richard Bartholomew. I write. I wrote a book. Came out in 1918. Joe Green published it. 2018, and I got a lot of 1900 stuff in my head. And it's called "The Deep State in the Heart of Texas." It's all of my monographs, essays up through 2016. And then once that came out, I started doing further. We had to leave half of my stuff out because it would have been too big a book. So I started formatting that to put online. That's now at my Substack, which is bartholomews.substack.com. And there's a little bio about me called My Small World of JFK Conspiracy. Born in Dallas, grew up in Dallas, left, came to Austin to go to UT. And this conspiracy was all around me, tells the whole story of that. And I was 7 years old when the assassination happened. And all these guys, my childhood, they defined my childhood. My governor, my president, I had two presidents. One of them died. They were replaced by another one. And so it was all in my head. And as you'll see in past videos, I talk about how I came to study the assassination because it was, I lived through it, and I grew up in the aftermath of it.
Now, we've talked about individuals, Harold Bird. We've talked about all these people in the past on private episodes. I want to get who you think was involved in the conspiracy. I'm not just talking about the cover-up. I know you insinuate or you connect those two together, that if there's people keeping the lie, they're part of it. I agree with you. I do. But at the same time, I'm looking, the public kind of has a warped perception here. There's the LBJ did it crowd and was behind the orchestrating. If you're part of that, that's fine. You can explain that. I'm going to let you do that. But I'm in the group of like a lot of LBJ was 100% involved in the cover up. There were other people involved that were in the cover up. There were other people that have already gained something and didn't really care about JFK in the first place. So a lot of them just didn't do their job or the proper ethical thing of looking into and doing a thorough investigation. I think that's a fair point to have. But for the comments that I'm seeing amongst the channel and from other people that are either hearing something from a book like Joan Mellon or anybody out there, they have a very different perception of things. So common questions I'm getting asked are about Mac Wallace, about people seeing somebody up in the 6th floor building, which we've already done a thing on the fingerprint, I'm pretty sure, an episode. But I want to get into more fact-based, source-based. Let's find out where the truth is in a lot of this, what you think people were involved with. We're going to talk about Connally. We're going to talk about Kilduff. We're going to talk a little bit about LBJ and his close associates. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. Earl Rose, even some things about him. But I think the simplest question to start off with, since we wanted to kind of talk about Connally, it was kind of be the discussion today, was going to Dallas. The whole planning of the trip, the initial thing of going down to Dallas, a lot of theories have been brought up that JFK was supposed to connect the parties or try and squash this divide between the conservative and the liberal side of things. In my opinion, I think from the conversations I've heard, I don't think it was about the split in the Democratic Party as much. I think it was about the fact that he had not been to Texas and he needed to go down there just to show face. And I think a lot of people like Connally and LBJ were pushing for that. But again, Connally states in his testimony, again, I'm not stating an opinion, just stating what I have clipped and what I found in testimony. And again, you're here to kind of show where Connally's lying a bit because it's not so easy. There are some things, but he stated that he wanted to push for a later date, and I think it was because of the fact of his politics. He was running for something, so I think at this point he was really focusing on that and didn't have time to put his focus into the motorcade. But again, he was more focused about Kennedy's safety, he states, only about the fact that the motorcade was going to beat him down after all the stops and all the meeting with people, but was not concerned about the threats to Adlai Stevenson or the assault on Adlai Stevenson or the General Walker shooting. This was brought up by Samuel Devine of the HSCA, which I think is a great point. How are you not worried about the president's being shot at over the fact that you're just worried about him being tired? I mean, pull out a Cliff Bar and eat it while you're on the drive.
One point I want to make right up top, the HSCA, House Select Committee on Assassinations, allowed Connally to be its chief source for the Texas trip. Throughout his testimony, it was clearly self-serving and obviously false. And I can show you how. And but they allowed him to lie. And because they were the HSCA, and what they wanted to do was endorse the Warren report. They did it as much as they could. And then at the last minute, they couldn't. So they found that little compromise and said, yeah, it was a conspiracy, but we think the Justice Department should take it from here, which they never did.
Now, you said that they were going to endorse the Warren report. Can I bring up another one to your perspective? Could it be possible that Connally did, a lot of people did like Connally, and a lot of these people involved in the HSCA had some type of, look like a lot of experience in politics, and they seemed like they were very friendly with Connally. There's many people, Richardson Pryor, Samuel Devine, who even asked harder questions, were also very thankful for Connally taking the time out of his day, as much as they were with Gerald Ford when he came down. It was kind of like they were very honored to have him sitting there. And I think with that could be a lot of reasons why some certain things weren't pressed. I didn't see Sawyer speak up really at all during Connally's testimony. And he was the one during the HSCA questioning of Marina and others that were bringing up really important questions and kind of being self-serving with their questions. Like, you didn't think to check out of the blanket for a rifle, but you ran into the garage to check if the blanket was there.
Connally was a big deal. He was a big deal nationally as well as in the state. But he was a really big deal in the state. They say he was, at the time, he was the most popular governor in years. But that's because it's Texas and he fit in with the whole atmosphere of conservative Texas. And in Texas, there's no such thing as Republican and Democrat. Those are meaningless names. The thing about Connally was he was charming. He was handsome. He was charming. He knew how to work a room. And he lit up a room when he walked in. He was tall. He was like 6'3", something like that.
6'4".
6'4", yeah. He was tall. I've seen him in person. I went to see him talk a couple of times on the UT campus when I was there. And so, yeah, I've interacted with him. I've interacted with the whole, LBJ White House because I went to seminars at the LBJ Library. Little, seminars where only scholars showed up, but I showed up there. And I found myself sitting next to the family and next to Jack Valente and Katzenbach, and they were all in the room. And it was intimate.
Did you smell sulfur?
It was that. Say what?
Did you smell sulfur?
Yeah, easily. But it was interesting to see how they all interacted with each other, especially Jack Valente, and we're going to talk about him a little bit. But man, I tell you, they're just like people. But Connally, the thing about it is, I put up a cartoon the other week that I did in 2005 about the governor's race in Texas, the one where Carol Keaton McClellan was running, and so was Kinky Friedman against Rick Perry and some other guys. And Carol McClellan was Bar McClellan's ex-wife, and she was former Austin mayor running for governor. And so, but I like Kinky Friedman because he was a comedian and a musician, and his campaign slogan was "How hard can it be?" He died just last year, and he just put out a posthumous album. But somebody posted a comment to that cartoon because they had Rick Perry in there, and he was the current governor. And they said, "Oh, I met Rick Perry on a plane, and he was so charming and nice." And I said, "As our most social, as our most psychopaths," and that was Connally. Connally could charm you out of every cent you had because he was a con man, but he was a good con man because that's how psychopaths are. They can manipulate you, and all they are interested in is manipulating you. And Connally was in the best. Governors since him don't even come close. Um, and he was vastly intelligent, and I could almost see, I could easily see. We can get into that too, but LBJ would not have gotten as far as he did. And I think other historians have pointed this out, especially ones who focus on Connally. LBJ would not have gotten as far as he got without Connally. Connally was the master campaign guy, and that's why they met very early. Connally, they're 9 years separated. LBJ was 9 years older, and so when Connally got to UT, LBJ helped him get his first job on campus at the UT libraries, and that was 1936. And they liked each other right off the bat. Um, and then he worked on LBJ's campaign for Congress in 1937. Um, and in 37, he met uh, Ida Nellie Brill, and a couple years later married her. That's Nellie Connally. But they were introduced by D.H. Byrd. It was D.H. Byrd that introduced Nellie to John Connally. And Byrd always said after that, John Connally owed me the rest of his life, owed me a huge debt because I'm the one that introduced him to Nellie. And Byrd said that he could always go to Connally. He was one of the guys he could always go to when he needed somebody for some action. If he needed something done, he was one of the guys he could go to. But he had all the governors, all the living governors, Byrd had in his pocket. And of course, he had LBJ in his pocket. And so all that started early. Byrd was older than LBJ, but they all went to UT. And they all stayed at the same boys' dormitory, Old B Hall. Well, LBJ didn't go there. He went to Southwest Texas State Teachers College. But all the rest of them went to UT. And LBJ, his first campaign in Congress, it was a sitting senator died, and LBJ got appointed to take his place temporarily, which meant they had to have another election. And so Connally immediately signed up to be a volunteer on that campaign. Also, that's where 1937, that campaign for Congress, Brown and Root, it was for Congress, not Senate. Senate was later. Brown and Root, the oil field construction guys, they were the principal source of campaign funds after Johnson's initial run for Congress in 1937. Now, hanging around these guys back in the 30s was a guy named Jack Halfin. He's a Dallas gangster associated with Pretty Boy Floyd and Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. And he organized the rackets in Houston by the late 30s. Carlos Marcello, the mob boss out of New Orleans, who had the Texas district as well, his funds, Marcello's funds, went through Halfin to the campaigns of Houston Congressman Albert Thomas and LBJ. And then Connally was on LBJ's congressional staff. after he won the election in 39 to 41, and they were connected at the hip. After that, Connally and LBJ were connected at the hip. And everything they did, they helped each other out. So they were a team. And I don't think neither of them would have gotten as far without the other.
I want to ask you about Albert Thomas. You know, Albert Thomas was on Air Force One when Kennedy arrived to Dallas. So not riding with LBJ, but was riding with JFK, and he's the one that was in the famous wink photograph. He was the one winking.
Yeah, I know all about Albert Thomas. I can tell you a lot about Albert Thomas. He's key to this. Let me just tell you this. There's some general things about the trip planning. That just gives you the background all the way back to the 30s. But let's shoot back up to general stuff about 63 and the trip planning. Yeah, let me just say a general thing here that the trip planning, Connally's role in the trip planning is the best key to understanding the conspiracy. Who did it, how it was done, and the nature of the way they covered it up. There's nothing better as a microcosm of that entire conspiracy than following the details of that trip planning, because everybody's there and connected, because that was the crucial point. Now that what initially prompted, now here's where Albert Thomas comes in right off the bat. What initially prompted JFK to begin planning a trip to Texas was that question. The answer is publicly available, but it was buried. It was very well buried. But there's a guy that figured it out, George Michael Evica. He was a great researcher that nobody knows. George Michael Evica, his book was called And We Are All Mortal, the last 5 words of JFK's peace speech. It's a great book. He wrote another book that was published posthumously. I got it back here somewhere. It's called A Certain Arrogance. But he never published the detail. He gave a workshop where he had done all the research on this trip planning. 1993, the ASK conference, Assassination Symposium on John F. Kennedy, at the Hyatt Reunion in Dallas. It was the 3rd ASK conference. And he had a little workshop. It was like a 2-hour workshop. And they taped it. I was at the workshop. It blew my mind. I bought the tape and I transcribed it. And I distributed that transcript to anybody that was interested in this subject. And it went like, it was double spaced and all this. This was back in early word processing days. And first, I would mail it to people at first. And then when Dropbox came around, I put a digital copy up on Dropbox. That's still there, publicly available if you want the original transcript. But once I got on Substack, I took that transcript and I wrote it out verbatim, without the format, the numbered lines of a legal transcript format, and I just wrote it out as a straight transcript that you can read. It's long, so I had to put it in 2 parts, but it's called Transcript, George Michael Evica Workshop, Connally's Role in the Trip Planning. Now, what I got here is I took all of the information out of that workshop transcript and I arranged it chronologically, because Evica does go through a chronology, but he skips around. And he had a lot of general statements about the trip planning. So in 1963, Representative Albert Thomas of North Houston and its suburbs was the catalyst. He was the reason for the trip. JFK probably would have gone to Texas in 63, but he decided definitely to go to Houston on November 21st, 63, solely because Representative Albert Thomas wanted him to go. Kenny O'Donnell testified to the Warren Commission that, quote, an invitation to the president had to be received from Thomas or his committee. And then he said something interesting. He said, "Oh, wait, not the congressman himself." And then he just left it there. But Everga said, uh, "What does he mean by that?" Uh, he continued, quote, "And the president was very fond of Congressman Thomas, and I knew he would want to go if at all possible. I would think that the invitation to the Thomas dinner, it was a dinner planned in Houston to honor Thomas and all the things he had done for the administration and in Congress. And it turns out that Thomas had been diagnosed with cancer. So they also wanted to give,
that's what I thought
they
it was
also
about.
wanted a time, they wanted to have a dinner for him and honor him, knowing that he didn't have long to be around. Um, and so that dinner, uh, this is O'Donnell saying this, had more to do with setting the actual definite dates of November 21st and 22nd to visit Texas than anything else. Larry O'Brien further testified that that JFK was earlier interested in visiting Texas, but the Thomas invitation was it sort of fell into line after that. It presented an opportunity to make the Texas trip definite at that time. JFK was particularly fond of Thomas. He had a close working relationship with him in Congress. In O'Brien's opinion, the trip would not have been undertaken at all except for the dinner for the powerful Congressman Albert Thomas of Houston. O'Brien was interviewed about the trip planning by Ralph Martin. Ralph Martin wrote a book called A Hero for Our Time, 1983. And so Martin asked O'Brien, asked why JFK went to Texas. And O'Brien answered, Jack Kennedy would not have gone to Texas except that Al Thomas loved him. He was the very same, and he said the very same thing to William Manchester. So we have that on record. Albert Thomas was the reason that he went. Now, the whole thing was surrounded by secrecy. This has to be understood as well. The entire Texas trip was marked by secrecy, withheld information, unexplained shifting of dates and times, which were, in fact, set disinformation. The Secret Service, the White House staff, and the public were not informed about the details of the trip until just weeks before it occurred. The reason for that is that Connally had absolute control over the information, over the details of the trip until just weeks before it occurred. The reason, for the whole trip, he had control over the information on Dallas, on the luncheon site, on the motorcade. In effect, only LBJ, JFK, and Connally, and LBJ frequently got wrong information. Only they knew the details of the trip. LBJ, JFK, and Connally only knew the details of the trip. And even LBJ was either misinformed or not given important data. Now, John Newman reported that, and this was at another workshop at another conference, but John Newman, when he was just getting started in all this, before he written his first book, saw him at a workshop, and this workshop was about a guy named Howard Burris. Howard Burris was Johnson's military aide as vice president. He's a Texas guy. He was Army, and Howard Burris told Newman, and this is what Newman said: Johnson was sure in 1963 he was going to be dropped from the ticket. And that's coming from his military aide, close military aide. And I have that in a transcript that I haven't published yet, but I'm going to. Now, the official Texas trip pseudo histories tell three lies. JFK's major reason for coming to Texas was either to unite or disunite the Texas Democratic Party or to bolster his own weakened political standing in Texas.
Again,
all three support.
Hold on, that one that you just stated, that one was about like Monica Wiesek and all them, Jim Eugenio, all these people talk about the whole uniting the party situation. So I want to make sure we get kind of like this breaking down because this is a lot of what gets popularized in books and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. That was a two. There was actually two lies to either to unite or disunite the party. But the third lie was to bolster his supposed weakened political standing in Texas at the time. All three lies have something in common. Um, that and that is that, and that's a truth. The three lies give you a truth. That's the lie that Texas was very important, crucial to JFK's reelection. Um, and so that's another general point about why he went. Now, counter revisionist non-assassination books, um, domestic policy, foreign policy, memoirs, etc., by political historians, political scientists, and historians show a whole other Kennedy out there that we're not given information about. Books like Promises Kept by Irving Bernstein, 1991. Evica recommended reading non-assassination books. Um, and so I took him at his word, and I collected a bunch of them, and I've read them too. Now, the thing is, the reason why that third one is a lie. The polls showed Kennedy running ahead of Goldwater, and it looked as though he might be well on his way to a big presidential and congressional victory. Um, it's the national polls showed JFK extremely popular, easily defeating any other possible Republican candidate. The polls indicated that the country was moving quietly but firmly leftward. Um, Kennedy was supremely confident of his own reelection at this time. The religious problem, which had cost him 4 or 5 percentage points in 1960, now seemed dead. That was a done issue. That was no longer an issue. The national polls showed him exceptionally popular. Um, and so he was confident. So, but he felt like, Texas was not a problem. It was mostly, it was a campaign trip, yeah, but it was sort of a campaign trip to celebrate defeating. It wasn't about mending the split. It was about celebrating the victory over his left wing faction of the Texas Democratic Party against the right wing faction of the Democratic Party. The left wing faction was headed by Yarborough. The right wing faction was headed by Connally and LBJ. And they were about to declare victory over that right wing faction. Um, so those are the general. Let's see.
I can
Yes.
play some clips because I got to bring this up. But if you Google right now, Kennedy's reason for going to Texas, it says number one source is going to say Wikipedia. Doesn't matter if you call it factual or not. I'm not saying go by it. I'm saying this is what people are going to do when they search it up. It's going to say in 1963, Kennedy decided to travel to Texas to smooth over frictions in the state's Democratic Party between liberal U.S. Senator Ralph Yarborough and conservative Governor John Connally. Connally's own testimony debunks that. He says if you wanted to smooth other stuff, LBJ's thing was right down the hall and from Yarborough's. He could have easily just done it in D.C. The other thing that you mentioned about the whole popularity thing, that is not what's reported by Robert Blakey when he gives his introduction before even introducing Connally. It's not what Connally states back then. That's not what Gary Aguilar states when he was one of the main medical researchers that states being a Goldwater man. He was voting Goldwater, but still researched the Kennedy assassination. I think the popularity thing sounds like the most logical basis. Now, the 4 or 5 fundraising dinner things that LBJ and Connally both stated, that might have some truth in it, but I don't think that was his only reason for going to Texas. I think it was a lot of stuff without he hadn't been there yet. I don't know I don't really agree with you on the whole not going there for. I don't believe his popularity was doing that well when it was coming to the election thing.
Well, here's what Evica said at the workshop. He said, the liberals believed that they were within only a few months of smashing the Johnson-Connally, Washington-Austin axis. This is the quote. They did not want the controversy. resolved except at the election booth. In 1963, JFK was neither in trouble politically, nor did he perceive himself to be in trouble, as a number of revisionist historians, the Warren Commission, and the House Select Committee on Assassination would have us believe. So that's all revisionist history. And of course, it ends up as the main line in Wikipedia. Wikipedia says Oswald shot Kennedy. So, it's a shame that we have to keep, saying this. But the bottom line here, I wish we could just move on in a discussion like this without having to say it was a conspiracy. I've taken to calling, I don't call Oswald, I don't even accept the term lone gunman, because if you argue against lone gunman, you've still got gunmen. So I started calling him the non-gunman. Oswald was involved in one role only, the patsy. Now, as a counter to this whole idea of Kennedy was popular, he knew he was popular, he was going to rub it in. He was going to Texas for his good friend Albert Thomas. He was going to just, stick it to the right wing, LBJ and Connally. Now, on top of this, Connally was in trouble. At this time, Connally was in big trouble. The Houston Chronicle published on November 22nd, they published a poll that showed Kennedy Johnson popularity was trailing Goldwater 48 to 52%. It was in the margin of error, but it had no undecideds. So that right there tells you that it was suspicious. It was skewed to support an editorial that they wrote saying Connally's political future was threatened. So the Chronicle was sticking it to Connally, and so they skewed a poll. They took a poll and made it look like Kennedy was in trouble. Because if Kennedy's in trouble, then Johnson and Connally are out politically as well. If Kennedy doesn't win that election, then you can say goodbye to Johnson Connally too. Conservative Connally Democrats. Okay, so there's 3 points here. One, conservative Connally Democrats could lose control of the Texas Democratic Party in the crucial primary contest against the new liberal coalition. And that was a strong possibility. Two, the conservative Connally Democrats would then be unable to control the Texas State Democratic Convention. Three, the now liberal State Democratic Convention predictably would have declined to endorse LBJ for the vice presidency and certainly ignore him for a senatorial slot. And there's a fourth point. JFK would say, hey, how about that? And dump LBJ. So that was the political trouble going on. That was the true atmosphere. That was what was really going on behind the scenes politically in the Texas Democratic Party. Connally needed JFK because Connally needed LBJ. LBJ had to stay on the vice presidential ticket. And if he stayed on the vice presidential ticket, then they control the state convention and Connally is safe. Without Johnson on the ticket, Connally's plans for his own future in Texas and possibly the national stage would be in shambles. Now, when the House Select
Wait, can I
Committee
ask you about that real quick? Why do you think later, when Connally ran, he also wrote a book about the assassination and stuff? This became a problem with LBJ, and LBJ was kind of very angry with Connally on the phone with, I think, Frank Irwin was talking about even my best friends writing a book. And he seemed very pissed off, and Connally was running on his own platform, which LBJ was trying to support him as much as he can, trying to get Yarborough to step down, and a bunch of people that were running against Connally, trying to squash that out. But he was getting very offended with how Connally was making decisions without talking to him first about certain things. I mean, this was a couple of years later, around like 65, 67-ish.
Well, Connally was governor until 69.
Well, LBJ was dead by like, what, 69 or 70 something?
73.
73, okay.
So I don't know. I need the more information about
I got the
book,
clip. I'll play the clip.
Connally's plans. We could get to the bottom of it, but that's I'll put that in the category of no honor among thieves. All the guys who worked together in the conspiracy, they eventually off and on turned on each other.
2164, Connally would go against me, LBJ and Frank Irwin. So he was running for something, and a lot of his phone calls happen to deal with talking about Yarborough and others telling them to step down. Also, there's conversations about Hubert Humphreys, better not mention things about Vietnam.
Oh, this was February 1st, 64.
Yep.
Oh, there's a whole lot. There's a whole lot behind that then, because the assassination had just happened. The investigation was getting started, and they were they didn't really know where it was all going to go. They were going to try to control it. But Connally, especially, and I was going to get into this later, but this is a good spot to introduce it. Okay, and we can get into all the details for why this is, but we already said in general that Connally controlled the trip planning. With an iron fist, he controlled it. And he bullied his way. He bullied everybody. He twisted arms. He got control of that trip, every detail of it. And he kept control of it. And that trip happened the way it did because Connally made it happen that way. And so now it's 64. Kennedy is dead. Connally got shot. And he didn't like getting shot. He was setting it up for sharpshooters and was told, I'm sure, that, look, we know you're in the line of fire. You know that you're putting the car in the kill zone, triangulated sniper fire, but these guys are good. You don't have to worry about it. They're not going to hit you. Well, Connally was a major conspirator because he did the trip. He made the trip happen. He was a major conspirator. And right off the bat, they started, they wanted to kill Oswald earlier, but people who were linchpins in the conspiracy and had all the information and knew the most about it, they had to die first. There were certain key people that they had to kill quickly. I think Tippit was one of them. And I think Connally. I think they intentionally shot Connally. They set him up, but he survived it. It was a fluke. He survived by a fluke just because of the way he fell over and was holding the blood, the wound. He didn't bleed out in the car, and he was lucky that he survived that wound. And then, but after that, he was really pissed because he figured it out. He's a smart guy. He's savvy, and he's also a psychopath. So he was going to get his revenge. And right off the bat, he's saying from the interview in his hospital bed that he's saying contradictory things. He was saying contradictory things all year planning the trip. That's part of the propaganda. So it was no big deal for him to continue the propaganda and say things like, oh, well, I was shot by a different bullet than the one that hit Kennedy. And he was certain about that, and he stuck to it. But he also said, once the Warren Commission was published, he said, well, Warren Commission is right, but they're only wrong about one thing, and that's that I was hit by a different bullet than the one that hit Kennedy. Well, you can't have both bullets.
Yeah, exactly. Why do you think people said stuff like that later on? You had Malcolm Kilduff rejecting the single bullet theory, but agreeing with the final conclusion. Then you had Connally saying that the bullet that hit him was not the same one that hit JFK. You have a lot of these people that make statements later, and even Connally at the time, he still had to agree with the official conclusion. It seems like everyone has to agree with the official conclusion, but they all separate on small individual things. Even the HSCA included room for dissent.
Well, Kilduff, I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was one of the people who did that.
Who rejected the single bullet theory?
My idea about that, yeah, rejecting single bullet. But the main guy that benefited from that, the guy who started that, was Connally himself. So anybody saying that is echoing Connally, and they have a motive. I think it's because Kilduff had a motive for supporting Connally, and you can see that in the trip planning, in a crucial key point in the trip planning. There's a switch that takes place. The people who had made certain decisions, there's a whole team out of the White House behind Kennedy. Kennedy's guys And I'll name them all. I'll give you the date that this happened. Evica really nailed this. There was a switch between the White House team, advanced people and planners, and it suddenly, at one crucial point, it switched to the Connally LBJ team of advanced men and planners.
Is that how they
That
got in a
happened.
fight with Jerry Bruno?
That happened almost overnight. Um, no, that took place back in October. I got the date, but we can talk about that in detail too. But it's I love that whole story about Bruno going and meeting with Connally's people at the 40 Acres Club on the UT campus, because my office at UT, when I went to work for UT after I graduated, my office was on the fourth floor of the 40 Acres Club. And I would frequently have lunches and dinners down on the second floor where that dining hall was. And I can picture easily, because it hadn't changed much. I was there in the 80s, and the 40 Acres Club was pretty much the way it had been all those years. They turned it into staff offices on the third and fourth floor, but the second floor was still the faculty um, dining room. And I can picture so clearly the big long table where they would have had that meeting, and the atmosphere and the ambiance where they yeah, we can go into how they really handled Bruno. They were master manipulators. Connally was, and he put on a big old show to intimidate Bruno, and and you know that's part of that strong arm control that he was doing, and it started with what they did to Bruno at that meeting. But I have a personal connection to that because I was in that building for 10 years working for UT. Let's see. All right. So one last general point before we get out of general points on 63. When the House Select Committee on Assassinations had a chance to get at the truth, it chose the least reliable witness, to the Texas trip, and that's John Connally. And they opened their public hearings with John Connally's suspect testimony. They allowed him to lie. They opened with that. That was their first public hearing. And I'm pretty sure I saw it live on TV at the time. Now, there's one of the clips of Connally that you played where they're talking about 61 and 62, that he and LBJ were like talking about having this trip. But but Connally was not sworn in as governor until January 63. The election for governor that he won was the election in November of 62. So in 61, 62, he's, in 60, he's naval secretary. And let's see, do I have the dates on that? Yeah, I can find the dates on that later, but let's see. But yeah, he didn't become governor until 63. He was sworn in January 15th, 63. And he was governor until September 21st, 69. And he remained an unofficial advisor to Brown and Root while he was governor. Brown and Root is huge in this because they're pumping millions of dollars into LBJ's campaigns. And guess who is in control of that Brown and Root money? It's John Connally, because John Connally becomes LBJ's campaign manager in those early campaigns. Now, important to the Texas trip is the fact that the 58th Texas legislature, which meets only every 2 years for 120 days, and that year was one of those years, and they met from January 20th to May 24th. And Connally does say at one point, I'm too busy to worry about planning a trip. I've got the legislature to take care of. And that's a believable thing um, because that's what governors do here. We just ended one. So it was believable. It was a good lie, but it's a way of covering up the fact that he was extremely interested in the trip and they were already uh, putting things together. Um, so now, Albert Thomas. So in April, we can move to April, and there's several weird things that are happening in April of '63. I don't know if you've ever heard that name, Adele Edison, Edisen. There's this whole story about when she was in D.C. She was what she was a um, biomedical professional, and she went to biomedical conferences. And she met this guy Jose Rivera at one of them, and this is April 22nd to 23rd, '63. She's she's in D.C. and she'd already met this Jose Rivera guy in New Jersey at a conference, but then they meet up again in D.C. and uh, she was told by Rivera that this guy Lee Harvey Oswald was going to be involved in an assassination of John F. Kennedy. Rivera also mentioned the Carousel Club. Um, and she overheard him talking to another guy there on the street when they were going into a restaurant who called him Colonel Rivera. And this happened in Washington, D.C. Um, and he knew Oswald's New Orleans address and phone number, which he gave to Adele Edison. Um, and, you know, he had it right. It was later verified. 4905-7 Magazine Street, the apartment house. And he was giving her this information on April 23rd, '63, when Oswald himself didn't know where he would be living until May 9th. All right. So that's weird thing number one in April. Now, April 23rd, JFK had apparently agreed to visit Houston by November 21st, the Albert Thomas dinner, because LBJ announced it at a press conference at the Dallas Times-Herald on April 23rd, '63. JFK, here's the Dallas Times-Herald. Here's what they said. JFK to visit Texas later in the year. And it gave the general schedule, including Dallas luncheon. LBJ also told 2,000 business and civic leaders at the Crystal Ballroom at the Baker Hotel. He says he compares, he's giving the speech, but then he says something really weird to these civic and business leaders after the press conference where they verified that this was going to happen. And he says, he compares Kennedy to the pilot of an airplane. He says, we're all in this airplane and Kennedy's our pilot. And you may have a beef with him, but don't do anything to him now. He says, quote, at least wait until next November before you shoot him down. And that's quoted in the Dallas Times-Herald of April 24th, page 22. And that article is cited in Penn Jones' Forgive My Grief 4, 1976, page 1 and 2. So I call that whole episode the go signal. And you'll see in my essays where I mentioned that off and on in various places. But I call that the go signal. So whenever I refer to the go signal, I'm referring to LBJ saying this bizarre statement at the Baker Hotel, at least wait until next November before you shoot him down. Because we're all on the same plane. But it doesn't make any sense. Penn Jones pointed this out. It doesn't make any sense because November of '63 is not a presidential election year. There is no presidential election in November 63. So what's he talking about? This is LBJ. LBJ knows the political calendar. So it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, except as a go signal. And the fact that also happening on those same days is a guy in Washington, D.C., who knows Oswald is going to shoot Kennedy and that he's going to be in New Orleans before Oswald ever goes there. And he's telling an innocent bystander, Adele Edison, about this. This is all happening on the same days. So that's why it has all it rings as if it's a go signal. And that's not the only thing that's happening at this time. Lots of things start happening after LBJ makes that announcement. And then again for me personally, since I found this bizarre Rambler station wagon on the UT campus, one of the things I found out about it was that the UT professor that owned it, he bought it on April 26th, 1963, just days after all these weird things are happening. And he bought it from a guy named C.B. Smith of C.B. Smith Motors in Austin, Texas. C.B. Smith was a huge backer of the University of Texas and a close friend of LBJ's. And so, and he buys it from C.B. Smith's son, C.B. Smith Jr., which comes into play later. But this is a Spanish and Portuguese professor, and C.B. Smith is a big funder of Spanish and Portuguese programs at the University of Texas. And he sells him this Rambler station wagon, 1959 Rambler station wagon, on April 26th, 63. And then this guy, George Gordon Wing, the professor, he owns that car up until his death. And he actually owns it until some buddies of mine and I told this story, you can go and listen to it, where I tell the Rambler story. He owned that car, and then his widow owned it after he died in 91, until we went and found it parked at the curb and bought it from her. And then we had it up until it disappeared in the late 90s. So the origin story of that car, which goes on and on, most of my book is about that. That all started at the same time. Now, the day before Wing buys that car, the Dallas Times-Herald makes another announcement. November 25th, JFK to visit Dallas in November. Houston and Dallas to be visited either on the 21st or the 22nd. The 21st, mind you, is already the Houston dinner date. So here we are, April 25th, and they're already talking about Dallas, and they're already talking about the 22nd. So on April 25th, it's already a 2-day trip, 21st and 22nd, and Dallas is the 22nd, because the Houston dinner is an evening dinner in Houston. So they're not going to make it to Dallas at least until the 22nd. So we already have that in place. Very important to know. Major general blurb here. Let me just say it like this. The Houston date is fixed. So every other comment that things are fluid is in opposition to the fact that JFK had chosen November 21st to go to Houston. So everything else you talk about, oh, Connally was trying to make it later. I can explain it. Evica explains all of that clearly. I call it continuity disinformation. They were muddying what they were doing, what Connally was doing when he was making statements like that. He was keeping it fluid. He was keeping the continuity of it fluid, that, it's fixed, but it's not fixed. We're going to do it on this date, but we're thinking about LBJ's birthday, blah, blah, blah. He does that on purpose. It's disinformation because it muddies the record for future historians. That's how brilliant the disinformation planning was behind this assassination. There's no crucial point, no more crucial key point to do that with than the trip planning, because somebody figures out the trip planning either in advance or just after. If they figured it out during the Warren Commission investigation, it's all over. If they had figured that out, that's another reason that the fact that it was key and they had to make that Houston trip planning disappear is another reason why Connally had to die in that car. And the fact that he lived was a major damage control factor after that. Now, okay, so we have the Dallas Times-Herald saying this in April 25th, the day before Wing buys that car. Now, guess who now there's the local Houston committee organizing and controlling the Thomas dinner. And guess who its chairman was? Jack Valente. All right, Jack Valente is a Connally.
Before we get into Jack Valente, can I play some clips? I got like 50 clips on my computer already. I can't keep going.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool. Let me try and go back through the thousands of things you mentioned here. Hang on a second. And feel free to comment after the clip is done.
Hear Connally doing this.
Feel free to comment after if you feel like you need to. Let's just start off with something, a little bit of Malcolm Kilduff, and then we'll work our way back to Connally, and then we'll get into Jack Valente.
I do think that the Warren Commission's basic findings on who fired the shot, etc., were accurate. I think the Warren Commission will tell you that one shot went through Kennedy and into Connally. I totally reject that finding. And I've talked to Governor Connally about it, and indeed it was the second shot that went into Connally because he turned around, and as he turned around, therefore the bullet entered the way it did and came out the way it did, and I've seen the scars, and there's no way that those scars could have occurred from the one bullet and coming in unless it had decided to make a 45-degree turn.
Now, what you mentioned about Connally's point changing a lot of people's opinions. That's John Sherman Cooper. Hold on if I look him up real quick. I have John Sherman Cooper saying that it was Connally. Everyone has stated when it came to their dissent from the single bullet theory, it came from Connally. It did not come from anybody else. Do you remember what your point was on that?
Yeah, I made that same point. I didn't know they all said that.
See, watch.
Connally was certain it hadn't. He said, I know guns. I rifle. I fire them all the time. When I heard the shot, I looked immediately over my right shoulder, which was the place where Oswald was working. And then I turned around and I was hit. His testimony was very convincing, and of course you know from everything we know about him, he's a very forceful man. And he convinced Dick Russell, and I must say he convinced me that the other was too intangible. It made it more difficult to say that Oswald was the sole assassin, because the shots would have had to been very close together, and he would have to be a very good marksman. But anyway, we said that we held for the Connally theory. Most of the others were for the two-shot theory. But we finally wrote into our summary that there had been two views, and gave the explanation.
Okay, so that's John Sherman Cooper, who served on the Warren Commission. Now, he just mentioned that it was very forceful, that changed his opinion and Dick Russell's opinion. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but it does go to what you're saying about kind of coming from Connally of the oh God, I just forgot what I was going to say. The single bullet theory, changing their minds, a decision on that.
Talk to me.
This is Malcolm Kilduff.
Did you know?
Why? No, I don't know. They never called me. They never questioned me. They never sent an interviewer to talk to me. And neither has this Committee on Assassinations. I made myself known to this guy Sprague way before I left Washington and said, I'll be very glad to offer you anything I can. And he said, give me a memorandum. Well, the last thing in the world I'm ever going to do with somebody, if they haven't got any more interest in what I have to say than to say, give me a memorandum and go to hell. Because if he has specific questions, I'll be glad to answer those specific questions. But I don't know. I could write a memorandum of 2 pages, or I could write a memorandum of 200 pages and still not cover the one obscure little item that he may be interested in, if he has any interest, or if he knows what in the hell he's looking for, which I sincerely doubt. So therefore, I absolutely refuse to just sit down and write these clowns a memorandum. But I didn't even get that much of a courtesy from the Warren Commission.
So that's Malcolm Kilduff. Again, he was a little bit critical on the single bullet theory. I already played that clip. You heard it. I'm going to play the Dallas trip. Why Malcolm Kilduff stated why for the Dallas trip.
So that trip was designed primarily, even though we hit the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston and so forth and so on, was nevertheless to firm up the backing, the Democratic backbone, in an attempt to bring the John Connally and the Ralph Yarborough factions of the Democratic Party together so that they would operate as a single force in the 1964 presidential election. And that was the real reason for that trip.
Well, how long before you went did you know you were going?
About a week. About a week.
Who went from the White House?
Well, the advance man was a fellow by the name of Wayne Hawks, who did the advance work for the press office. He was in our records section, but who had been around in the press operation, in the periphery of it for years, going back again to, I guess, the last days of Roosevelt.
I'm going to play Connally's reason for the Dallas trip.
I must say that at that point in time, I don't remember the figures exactly, but the president was not extremely popular in Texas, nor was he in the country. He wasn't unpopular. They had a very bitter campaign in 1960. He'd carried Texas by 46,000 votes, approximately 46,200 some odd votes, with Vice President Johnson on the ticket with him. So it had been an extremely close, extremely hard-fought election. The president had brought great elan, he brought great culture, he brought great dignity and excitement to the White House. But in spite of that, his legislative program had not fared all that well. He was not all that popular in the country, and his popularity had diminished considerably, as a matter of fact. And he was already looking at 1964 and the campaign of 1964.
Okay, there's that. Hold on, I got another one. John Connally saying, why did Kennedy come to Dallas?
Senator Ralph Yarborough was then in the Senate, and he was being constantly harangued by his supporters in Texas. They were saying that, well, they're structuring this thing, they're trying to keep us away from the president, and the president's supporters are not getting to see him, and Senator Yarborough was relaying those to the White House and to the advanced people, and we were arguing about tickets, and we were arguing about everything in the world. It got to be a major hassle, and part of this raised the question that has since been discussed at great length. If the president came to Texas to resolve the differences in the Democratic Party in Texas, nothing could be further from the truth. The two individuals who were most involved in the split in the party were Senator Yarborough and Vice President Johnson.
Now, Johnson's LBJ, his phone call states that he didn't even know what was going on, but there was a feud between Connally, Nellie, and Yarborough, and they would not have rode in the same car together. Apparently, what I honestly think, based on these phone calls and what these recordings and testimony is, Yarborough did not want to ride with LBJ because LBJ was being LBJ, and he didn't know he was offending Yarborough or being mean to Yarborough, and Yarborough was getting sensitive about it and wanted to get out of the car. But again, the whole theory of LBJ wanting to get Connally in his car so he could save him from being shot in Dallas, he wouldn't leave Connally's wife. There's no way. He had the same admiration for Nellie as he did for John. That's just maybe a Texas thing. I don't know. But that never made sense to me. But then the other one I wanted to play was you were talking about the fixing the party theory that's out there that I'm just not believing anymore.
Two individuals who were most involved in the split in the party were Senator Yarborough and Vice President Johnson. And both of them were in Washington, D.C. And this is where the trouble was. The trouble arose basically over federal patronage and federal appointees. And Vice President Johnson was trying to get every federal appointment he could get, and so was Senator Yarborough. Senator Yarborough was complaining constantly to the White House, to President Kennedy, that Johnson was usurping his patronage rights of the Senate with respect to federal judges, marshals, and so forth. This was the battle here. And indeed, if the president was interested in resolving that difficulty, he had Vice President Johnson right across the street in the old executive office building. He had Senator Yarborough right here on the Hill, and he could have gotten them together in 10 minutes. But that wasn't the purpose of his trip to Texas at all. Had nothing to do with it. First place, he couldn't settle the differences within the Democratic Party. They hadn't been settled yet.
Now that sounds more believable to me. And then there's this one right here, the feud on the Dallas trip.
They'd had quite a hassle in Houston. That Senator Yarborough refused to ride in the car with Vice President Johnson. So I said, well, you know, I don't care who rides in which car. I didn't worry much about it. But nevertheless, it had happened. And it was by that time the talk of the motorcade, talk of the press. And so I didn't think any more about it till the next morning. And the president, when he came back from his speech, the first thing he did when he got up, Miss Kennedy was not with him. Jim Wright, Congressman Jim Wright, who's now the majority leader of this Congress, the House, took him across the street from the Texas Hotel into this parking lot, where he spoke to the crowds there, and then he came back into the Longhorn room of the Texas Hotel and sat down, and he motioned for me to come over, and I went over there, and he said, John, did you know Yarborough refused to ride with Lyndon yesterday? I said, yes, sir, I heard that last night. And he said, by God, he'll ride with him today or he'll walk.
Now, based on a lot of theories and a lot of people that have just heard this and can't point to a source, they always mention that the argument was between LBJ and Kennedy. I more believe this, that it was something that Connally said, or JFK said to Connally, and it wasn't a fight between LBJ. I don't even think LBJ and Kennedy talked that night or that day before they got into the cars and started going, because I think LBJ was mad. There was a meeting at the El Paso Hotel, which is where they said they thought the Dallas trip came from. I have that clip too to play. And it was brought up more questioning by the HSCA. Like I said, I don't know. I'm not trying to state. I'm just trying to find a factual source. And right now my source is this, and there's sources with Kilduff that kind of match. I mean, this was all about the feud on the Texas trip. And then if I get out of this real quick, I'll go to the Malcolm Kilduff talking about the same exact thing, basically. So here's the why. I already played the why the Dallas trip, but this is Kilduff talking about being apprehensive of Dallas.
Were you apprehensive at all about the trip?
I was a little apprehensive about it because you've got to remember that a couple of months before that, Adlai Stevenson had made a trip to Texas and had rotten eggs thrown at him.
Mm-hmm. You were apprehensive, though, about the political repercussions and what was going to happen.
And demonstrations against the president.
How you would handle them yourself.
Well, you're naturally curious how you're going to handle it, but
no, I don't mean. I mean how you would handle it with the press and when these things happen. So that would be another job.
No, because you can't really anticipate what's going to happen. If you imagined in advance that there'd be 15 different things that might happen, just sure as God made little green apples, the 16th would happen and you wouldn't be prepared. So you more or less trained yourself by that time not to try to anticipate anything in specifics, but just to handle it as best you could under the circumstances. And up until the time we got to Dallas, we got a marvelous reception.
Well,
now, both of them said that Connally and Kilduff stated that it was an excellent reception. The only thing that he saw that was an issue, he was afraid of picketers, and he just saw one sign that said, "Go home, Kennedy," and he was hoping that Kennedy didn't see it. Then he made the whole crowd laugh with Kennedy's response to him. Now, that conflicts with this one right here, the climate of Dallas. Now, Samuel Devine asked Connally, you heard what Kilduff just stated about the Adlai Stevenson incident. Somehow this wasn't a problem for Governor Connally talking about the safety of the president. He was more concerned about the motorcade beating the president down with all the stops and the shaking of hands.
I suppose you were also, at least in the back of your mind, aware of the incident that had occurred to Ambassador Stevenson, as well as General Walker.
Yes, sir.
And these were matters of concern to you, but you still had no anticipation that anything of violence might occur. Is that
No,
correct?
sir. And my objection to the motorcade really was not based on any apprehension of violence, Congressman Devine, at all. It was, as I've testified, merely in order to try to save the president the wear and tear of a motorcade. And
At any juncture during the planning and scheduling, did you specifically discuss with the Secret Service what possible harm might come to the president, and if so, from what source? Either you or your people?
Congressman, I don't think so. I don't know. Some of our people might have raised that point with the Secret Service, but I doubt it, because in none of our discussions or planning sessions did we dwell on that subject or make any point of it.
Again, that's another issue if you're concerned about the safety. That's kind of the same clip. It just got some other stuff added to it.
And
And
what's
there
the
was
problem between Yarborough and Connally, too?
well, they just plain didn't like each other. That's all. Ralph Yarborough is a rather peripatetic type who tends to great emotionalism. He was not a Connally man in any sense of the word. But Yarborough did not figure into that. He was the darling of a great number of Texas Democrats, liberal Democrats. So he
All
had
four
to
of them.
become part of the trip very much. Yeah, and so that trip was designed primarily, even though we hit the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston and so forth and so on, was nevertheless to firm up the backing, the Democratic backbone, in an attempt to bring the John Connally and the Ralph Yarborough factions of the Democratic Party together so that they would operate as a single force in the 1964 presidential election.
Now, that's not what we hear from Connally. That's what we hear from LBJ and now Kilduff matching statements. But that's not what we hear from Connally. Now, this next one I'm going to play right here is the urging of the Dallas trip.
Well,
About the whole trip.
It's always been my understanding that the trip to Texas was taken at the urging of Lyndon Johnson and of John Connally, for the reason that 1 year after we would have a presidential election. Now, you've got to remember that in 1960, Kennedy got elected by a very, very slim margin. Texas was considered to be a key state in the forthcoming presidential race of 1964. And the Cuban Missile Crisis had bothered some people in Texas. And
What's
there
the
was
problem between Yarborough and Connally, too?
Well, they just plain didn't like each other. That's all. Ralph Yarborough is a rather peripatetic type who tends to great emotionalism. He was not a Connally man in any sense of the word.
And Connally also made a statement that Kennedy's supporters were not my supporters. So having Connally in the car with them for views, I've heard that being tossed out too. Didn't really make a whole lot of sense on that one. This is what I wanted to play. I thought was interesting, and I do agree with Malcolm Kilduff on a couple of these. It's mostly this one.
It's unfortunate, but I think it has to be said that Kennedy was never regarded as a member of what is affectionately known as the Club on the Hill. When he was a senator, he stayed somewhat to himself. He did not play the "you scratch my back, I scratch yours" game as the other 99 might have. Therefore, he was not, even though he had been a member of the Senate, was not regarded by other members of the Senate.
It's of the Senate, right?
As some of the take people like Eastland and Richard Russell, Dick Russell of Georgia, people of that ilk, as Stu Symington, and even Henry Jackson. it just didn't work out that way. He just so therefore, when he went to the White House, the power of the presidency was probably less than he thought it was.
There's that, and then there is the big difference between LBJ and JFK.
Kennedy was never regarded as a member of what is affectionately
It sounds
known
similar.
as
There's two interviews that are similar.
on the Hill. When he was a senator, he stayed somewhat to himself. He did not play the "you scratch my back, I scratch yours" game as the other 99 might have. I don't know that the Kennedy staff fully appreciated until years later the great ability of Lyndon Johnson in this regard. Here, the Kennedy White House had an ideal opportunity through the proper use, and I hate to use that word, but it's true, the proper use of the vice president as a member of the Senate Club to get things that they could never get done on their own, and they didn't get done on their own. Major civil rights legislation, for instance, didn't go through until Johnson. And how did Johnson do it? He did it by going up to the Hill and sitting down at night with these guys and bumping heads together. Oh, yeah, he'd go up there. He'd go up there and sit down over a bottle of bourbon. Kennedy didn't do that.
I play these because I know you mentioned about Johnson and knowing the game. I actually have a clip on that, which is Johnson knew the game.
He could tell John Kennedy if a bill was coming up on the floor of the Senate. He could tell him what that vote was going to be, and he'd never miss. I mean, by one, he'd never miss. Mm-hmm. If he missed by one, it was only because the member was absent. He could count heads like nobody imaginable. Bobby Baker used to count heads for him, and Bobby was able to count votes too. In other words, counting votes.
I think I'll ask you about Bobby next week when I
but he could count heads, and if he asked Harry Byrd of Virginia how he was going to vote, Harry Byrd would tell him how he was going to vote. Or if he didn't know, he'd find out how he was going to vote, and he was never wrong. Johnson was absolutely never wrong. He was totally uncanny. And I don't know that the Kennedy staff fully appreciated until years later the great ability of Lyndon Johnson in this regard.
I'm so glad when this guy was doing the oral histories, William H. Burgess, that his tape stopped so many times that they had to keep repeating last lines of things or things that they were just talking about, because then I can get perfect things like this where it's like a different explanation or it's in another way. I wanted to play the Kennedy people looking down on LBJ, because I do agree with that.
Kennedy was president, Johnson's vice president. Were there any people around the White House that sort of looked down their nose at Johnson?
Oh, sure. That's always the case.
How long did it take them to change their tune to the same guy?
Some of them never did.
Could you tell me who, or would you rather
No,
not?
I prefer not to.
Okay.
Some of them were so close to Kennedy that their whole life had almost been wrapped up in Kennedy.
Yeah.
And their whole political life certainly had been wrapped up in him. And you have to remember there was a pretty bitter convention fight over the nomination. And some of those old political scars had not healed. And I don't think they ever really healed. Mm-hmm. Johnson had said on the flight back that he wanted all the Kennedy staff to remain. And most of us did remain for various time periods.
He also stated that it felt like he didn't really want you there. So I do agree with that a bit. This was I think it was LBJ, the photos of the swearing in. He talks about the wink and everything. It's Malcolm Kilduff still.
And she came forward at that time for the swearing in. He wanted her present at the swearing in, at his swearing in. He acted in a fashion that some people had described later as being rather gross. And that's a lot of crap. After all, he was under strain, too, a tremendous amount of strain.
Uh-huh.
And he was doing what, he thought in his own way it was the proper thing to do. And I have,
In retrospect, do you think it was?
yes, I think it's perfectly proper. As long I think on something like that, Bill, you have to look at the intent. What was his intent?
Sure.
How
did he act when they first met each other? Did they
total just stunned?
Did they touch or?
Yeah, they hugged each other, and Mrs. Johnson did too. There was very little said.
Mm-hmm.
And then Judge Hughes was there. But now, through all of this, of course, we had lost all the pool photographers. They were long gone. They were back at the hospital still.
And then there's this one.
So at that time, he had talked with Robert Kennedy.
Johnson. You mean?
Right. Johnson had talked to Robert Kennedy. And Robert Kennedy's advice to him was that he be sworn in Dallas. So then they had to go and find someone who could swear him in.
This is the kind of stuff you were doing before Mrs. Kennedy got back. Is that right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So
because she was there when he was sworn in.
That's right. So by that time, they then located Judge Sarah Hughes and got her on her way, I guess, in a police car out to the airport. In the meantime, they brought the president's body back. They'd gotten him in a casket. And
some kind of problem about Texas wanting to control the body to...
Oh, yeah, the coroner there had attempted to hold the body for autopsy.
Now, based on Earl Rose's statements, Earl Rose said he was never threatened. He said someone might have gotten threatened, but he wasn't threatened with anybody. Again, that's another thing that comes out. He said that the guns were there, but they were just there. It wasn't like they were being shown around or forced out of them. They did force the body out. In my opinion, I agree with Brad Parker, who's interviewed them and stated that Lyndon was not leaving without Jackie, and Jackie was not leaving without her husband, so now it's a security risk to take the body back, and they did it in an unethical way. Jesse Curry actually is the one that granted permission for the body to be taken out of Dallas. And that's why Jesse Curry's also on that flight of Air Force One. Now, based on what this is, Bobby wasn't in Dallas, but LBJ called Bobby and told Bobby the news. And then Bobby was the one, apparently by Kilduff, stating that he needed to be sworn in. And that's why there was that urging of the swearing in. Based on Kilduff's remarks. Again, I'm not saying that's my opinion. I'm just stating it sounds a little bit more reasonable just because I'm hearing someone who was on Air Force One. I had the photo of him showing on there. He's also the person with the little press recorder holding it right there as well, too, recording the whole thing and wanting to get photos taken as well, too.
I was listening carefully when Kilduff was saying that about RFK. First of all, it makes no sense. And I think he said, you can play it again, but I think he said he heard a rumor that RFK suggested to LBJ.
He didn't say rumor. He said it was RFK that called him.
Well, then I say Kilduff is creating that fiction because here's the deal. In the Constitution, when the president dies,
You're a president. He knows that. Malcolm Kilduff, there's another clip of him where he talks about walking up to Lyndon Johnson and saying, "Mr. President, what we should do next." I played it with Jackie, or not Jackie, with Joe Green, the episode you said you listened to. You heard Jackie let out a squeal. It actually wasn't Jackie. It was Lady Bird that let out a noise when Malcolm Kilduff walked up to the vice president and called him Mr. President. What do we do next? And apparently Kenny O'Donnell was the one that told him to go up to LBJ and tell him. And then LBJ's first remark was, well, we would better get out of here because someone might be aiming for the next person, the vice president. And that's when they started to leave Parkland. That makes more sense because I have like 5 people in oral history stating almost the exact same thing, much like with LBJ and Malcolm Kilduff stating that it was a feud between Connally and Yarborough. And then Connally's the only one stating that it was a feud between LBJ and Yarborough. But I don't know because...
Yeah, so you see, they knew he was president. He didn't need to be sworn in. He was president.
Well, by the urging of RFK is what Kilduff states. I don't know why. I mean, maybe he needed to have the whole thing again. I don't know
even if RFK didn't urge that. RFK knows the Constitution. RFK knows that LBJ was president.
But how do you react when your brother dies?
That was performative. Yeah.
Jackie jumps on the back of the car. You think she would have done that in her normal life? No, nothing makes sense.
Yeah, that's completely unbelievable. RFK is more destroyed than anyone at the news that his brother was just assassinated.
But does it hit you? That's the question. Does it hit you? Jackie probably would have been. I think Jackie was probably way more crushed a couple days after than dealing with it then.
Yeah,
Everything
they're
is
both very
moving so
strong
quickly.
individuals, and they got through that funeral. They were with grace and courage, and they were everything. But for LBJ getting sworn in on Air Force One at that moment, that was performative.
But do you have a source for that besides your own speculation? Is what I'm asking. That's all I want. I'll look it up right now if you have a source for it. We're looking at photos. We don't understand what Kilduff stated. We don't understand the conversation that was done on the plane. LBJ, from Kenny O'Donnell and from a few others that have gave interviews, and you can look up the transcripts for them too, they all stated that LBJ called the Kennedy family. Now, that conversation from calling the Kennedy family, from Ted, from Rose, to Bobby, that conversation is all different. None of them all line up. For some reason, some people think it was to break the news. Some people say it was to say sorry. Some people say it was to do something else. That conversation is split off in like 50 different things. I'm just trying to find the one that matches a bunch of other statements. And so far, these are the only ones I've really found that match other statements. Again, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that is so far what is more historically preserved compared to the other things that you can't point me to a source to. I just need the source. I'll look it up and make the clip for it. I just need something where it's going to be easier to find out, because it shouldn't be this hard for someone learning the JFK assassination or getting interested in the JFK assassination to understand what the fuck was going on. I understand it's the biggest like conspiracy thing in like 60 something years, but it gets a little bit annoying when we're running off things of like the Parkland fight or the like. There's two fights at Parkland. Which one do you want to talk about? The one that the guy smashed a dude's face with the butt of a gun or something, and there was a Malcolm Kilduff states it was a fight between an FBI agent and a Secret Service person, which is also backed up by a letter of apology from J. Edgar Hoover. So again, it's all over the board here. If you can point me to something that's different, I can go with that. But right now, it seems the most plausible to me. I don't know about RFK swearing him in, but I don't know the conversation on Air Force One besides so far Malcolm Kilduff. If I can find more oral history interviews, which I'm hoping they're out there, I can understand better the context. But I don't know. The wink is obviously very incriminating. I just think it was bad humor. But as I mentioned to Joe Green, it's kind of like you have a tragedy happen, but you're also doing something that only happens once. I mean, this is his presidential thing.
I'm about to tell you how incriminating that wink was. But before we do that, let's make a general statement here. Not everything has a source. It can be true. The truth doesn't always have a source.
Again, there's not things written down about who did it. If there was an order to kill JFK, that wouldn't be written down. We get that.
No, but I'm talking about
for small historical stuff like this.
Things. Like if you, today, if you're alone in your house and when you go to the bathroom, and for some reason it comes up as an issue, there is no source, there's no proof that you went to the bathroom today.
My bladder's empty.
We talked about at one point. We talked about my two UFO sightings.
In autopsy, you would show my bladder's empty.
There is no source, no evidence, no other witnesses to my UFO sightings.
Take you at your word.
But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. That doesn't mean it's not true. There's not always a source for the truth. The truth doesn't require our participation. Lies require our participation. And all of the participation of everybody talking about that swearing in and the fact that it's not logical and it wasn't necessary and it's LBJ, the psychopath, doing it. All of this, the vast verbiage and writing supporting that swearing in, lies require our participation. The truth doesn't require us at all.
Again, you're entering a Russell Teapot's discussion where if I told you there was a teapot floating in outer space, you could not prove me wrong or you cannot prove me right. That means whenever you're stating your things like you're stating like they're fact, that needs to say, in my opinion, before you state them, because that's what it would be. I would have to take you at your word for it if you can't point towards the source. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying we're entering now the whole thing where there's nothing that can be proven, and then what's the point? I'm looking at oral histories. We don't have recordings. We actually do have a recording of the swearing in. That's Malcolm Kilduff has it, but I don't know if it's been released. I can't find
There
it.
is more. There is more about the swearing in and about the contacting of Sarah T. Hughes.
Do you know about the missing Bible?
Yeah, I remember reading something about the Bible.
Do you know it's not a Kennedy family Bible? Like everyone keeps saying it's a Kennedy family Bible, and that's why LBJ used it, because it was going to be a spit on the Kennedy thing right after the assassination. They found the Bible a month later. It was literally just a regular plain old Bible, and Sarah T. Hughes had given it to some person that happened to be a reporter who took it back to his office and shoved it in his desk like an idiot.
Yeah. But, the one fact we have here is the swearing in was not necessary.
I know it's not necessary, but again, nobody knows how to act in these situations. Again, I agree with Joe Green where you cannot try and predict intent of doing this when it's this type of traumatic situation. Again, Jackie jumping on the back of the car. Everyone says brain matter. We've all kind of known it's been brain matter, right? Malcolm Kilduff states that she was reaching back for Clint Hill to pull him in. If you look at certain photos, it does look like she's grabbing onto Clint. Clint Hill's trying to be like, no, stay in the car. If you believe the main Secret Service, whatever people keep saying is a Secret Service driver, they keep saying Jackie's trying to get out of the car. There's a lot of stuff where I'm like, what's the most plausible? And again, we have things that aren't going to be answered.
Let me tell you about that room on Air Force One then. You know who else is in that room in the back?
Yeah, I got
Jack
a clip
Valente.
on.
Jack Valente.
He wasn't listed on the log, and he's not listed in any of the interviews.
Now, but that makes a good. I'm glad you did that as the last clip, because that comes full circle back to what I was going to say about
1,000 other
Valente.
clips to play still.
This is a very key aspect of it here. Valente, Connally, LBJ. Valente was a Connally associate. Valente became an associate of LBJ after Connally's political prospects were declining. Valente jumped ship and became an instant LBJ supporter with 12 other major Connally people. In the White House in 63, 64, many people called them the Texas Gang. Through Valente, all the Connally anti-Kennedy forces had influence on the Albert Thomas supporters. Mainly Jack Halpin. I just told you about the guy in touch with Marcello, and Jack Halpin of Houston, a man close to Albert Thomas in the 50s, who had close links to all the suspected groups in the JFK murder conspiracy. So Albert Thomas, Jack Halpin is a linchpin. Albert Thomas was closely linked, therefore, in the 50s with Jack Halpin, a syndicate payoff bagman who worked with Houston gamblers Carlos Marcello and other syndicate leaders. Influential Texas political figures and munition smugglers who were supporting Fidel Castro's revolution in Cuba in the late 50s, including Jack Ruby and CIA-connected agents. And the ceremonial dinner in Houston on the evening of November 21st, 63, for Albert Thomas, the political ally of John F. Kennedy, was the irresistible reason for JFK coming to Texas and finally to Dallas. So all of the anti-Kennedy forces in the conspiracy revolve around Jack Valente, Jack Halpin, and John Connally right there.
Do you know the relationship between Jack Valente and LBJ?
Yeah, I just told you.
You know why they were so close?
Tell me.
Valente was LBJ's brother-in-law. That's how he got the position in the first place. You can hear Malcolm Kilduff and George Reedy and plenty of other people talk about Valente. The only reason he was close to LBJ was because he was in relation because of the brother-in-law thing. He said Jack Valente didn't know anything about politics, didn't know how the White House worked.
Brother-in-law is by marriage. What was the marriage that made him the brother-in-law?
Oh, God, I don't know. Let me look up the clip real quick.
Because there is a story about.
Well, he was married. He was married to someone, and then they got divorced. So I think it was like an ex-brother-in-law thing. I have to look it up real quick. Kilduff did a statement about it. Hold on.
How about Jack Valente? What did he do, and how good was he at it?
Well, Jack was more or less of a personal assistant, and Jack had an awful lot to learn about Washington. Jack had run an advertising agency. He'd been an on-site advance man for Lyndon Johnson in the Houston area for a while, had an ad agency down there. And his close association with Johnson came as a result of his having married one of Lyndon Johnson's former secretaries. Mary Margaret Wiley was her name before she was married. She was Mary Margaret Valente. And so he had a very close personal relationship. He was the closest in personal contact with the.
He was like the O'Donnell.
He was the O'Donnell, and then Dave Powers wrapped up into one.
How'd you get along with him?
With Jack, you never really knew how you got along with Jack. Jack, maybe it was because of his advertising background, but he always felt that he knew it was better to be said to the press than to the press secretary.
There's a photo of them in a hot tub together.
Couple of things here.
Just saying.
Yeah, so you see, it wasn't brother-in-law. He married a secretary. And the story is that this is one of those weird things again. The story is that LBJ fathered a child with that secretary, and to hide it, he got Valente to marry the secretary. Now, the kid, I've got her name written down somewhere, but she of course looks like the secretary, but she doesn't look like Valente at all. There could be some LBJ resemblance going on there.
I believe that, honestly.
But there's a lot of researchers find this very believable. I don't know what I don't know if there's any real sources.
Because hold on, because there's a quote from Kilduff about it. Hang on a second. I got to get it now. Hang on. You just reminded me. He's talking about scandalous behavior in the White House. He says no, but you hear him it sounds like he's winking, and then you hear everyone laugh, and then the tape cuts.
Exactly, yeah.
Let me ask you something. Now, if you don't want to answer, just tell me. We'll stop it there. You know, in the last couple of years, you heard a lot. You heard a lot. Did you witness much of that?
I sure didn't. I mean,
I'm not gonna say in the White House, but anywhere when you were in Washington.
No, I didn't. God knows. I don't know whether these guys ever had all the chance, all the time for their escapades. Was everybody an angel? No. Would you take your secretary or some gal with whom you worked out to have a couple of drinks after work? Yeah. Sure I would. Was there anything beyond that? No.
But I mean, you didn't witness any women get hired for that and classified as secretaries or anything like that?
No.
Yeah, you can hear he's like, no, shaking his head. So obviously there's some stuff going on there, but I mean, I was with Kennedy and LBJ. I do believe that. So I don't think anybody can try and debunk the Kennedy stuff, but LBJ is definitely part of it too. I think it's a quote from his wife in an oral history that Lyndon just loved everybody.
But you know, the daughter, who a lot of people think is LBJ's daughter through that secretary, was covered up by getting her to marry Jack Valente. Valente became a big deal in Hollywood, motion pictures, and that little girl, grew up to be the head of Warner
William
Brothers.
Underwood. Brown's claims detailed in her book in Texas in the Morning that she met Johnson in 1949 and that her relationship continued for over 2 decades. That's a completely different woman than the one that they just mentioned about Valente marrying. So.
Yeah,
Did he have multiple love childs?
That's Madeline Brown's book. But you know who wrote that book?
Madeline Brown?
Madeline Brown didn't write that book. Ed Tatro wrote that book.
Oh, he's a good researcher, though.
Yeah. So if Ed Tatro wrote it, you can take that to the bank. And the only reason I bought that book is because I found out that Ed wrote it.
Maybe they have multiple love childs.
But she grew up to be head of Warner Brothers. I think she may still be the head of whatever the parent company is now.
That would make
Warner
sense.
Brothers.
Jack Valente got involved in motion pictures.
Yeah, he was. He was the big deal. LBJ made him the head.
Hold on. This is the flight back from Dallas.
What do you remember about the flight?
Booze. buckets of booze, and nobody could get drunk.
Mrs. Kennedy rode in the back.
She rode in the back. She sat in a seat next to the casket all the way back.
Where was Johnson?
Johnson was sitting up front in the staff cabin.
You couldn't see him then from where you were.
Well, I stayed in there most of the time.
Oh, you did?
Him, yeah. And but the flight back, it was. And
do you remember
Mrs. Kennedy stayed back in the back of the plane with Kenneth O'Donnell and Pamela Tenor.
O'Donnell stayed back there.
O'Donnell stayed back.
Was Larry O'Brien on the flight back?
No. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have to check on that. I'm not too sure. Yeah, Larry was on the trip. I'm sure of that. Had to have been. In which event, he would have been back there together with Dave Powers.
I'm just going to play the rest of these because we got to get some of these clips out. This is Dallas in August, Connally testimony.
So I said, in effect, Mr. President, when do you want to come? Well, then he said, I think we ought to have 4 or 5 fundraising dinners. And he said, what do you think about having it on Lyndon's birthday, August the 27th? This was in June, as I recall. And again, I said, well, Mr. President, I'd like to think about that. I said, obviously the Vice President's birthday is always a time for celebration, but I said, August is the worst month of the year to have a fundraising affair in Texas for anybody. I said, too many people are gone. It's the dog days. It's the hottest month of the year. People are on vacations. They're not interested in politics. We can't get the support, and I think it'd be a serious mistake to come in August. Let me do some thinking, and we'll be back in touch with you, and I'll suggest a format of a trip that I think will achieve the purposes that you want to achieve.
And then we'll do Dallas had to be planned.
President Kennedy was too good a politician to try to come to Texas without my wholehearted support, or at least tacit approval, and the Vice President certainly would not have done it. You know, one of these trips, you know, it's not just as simple as saying, well, let's go to Texas. You know, this requires an incredible amount of planning, organization, detail, harassment, haranguing. We went through weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of this. So the idea that they're just going to pick up and come, I don't think was attractive to him at all. And it was obvious the President never seriously considered that. He obviously could have come anytime he wanted to. So could the Vice President. And the Vice President was down during this period of time in 62 and 63 on a number of occasions. But they didn't want to attempt to arrange the type of affair that they were interested in. Without my personal involvement and without the involvement of the state party machinery that I had constructed.
And this one is called Many Involved in the Dallas Trip, Nellie and John Connally.
Who spent a great deal of time on it.
Let me ask Mrs. Connally, were you involved in that process too?
Yes, I certainly was.
What was your role?
I was shining that mansion up like you never saw. We were trying to get everything ready at the governor's mansion for our first visit from a president and his lady. So I had all the hassles of any housewife trying to get her house in order so it would be just right for the very special guest.
I think to put it in a little different context, I think the first thing we agreed on, and Nellie certainly was involved in intimate detail with the trip, because the one thing we had agreed on, we were going to try to wind up with the fundraising affair in Austin, Texas.
And then I got...
because we were at that point...
No, I'll play that one. What did you gain from the Dallas trip, John Connally?
Given that climate in the state of Texas and in the nation, what, if anything, did you expect that you could personally gain, or that could be gained for your wing of the Democratic Party from the Texas trip?
Well, I thought first that Texas is always, I think, a considerate and a hospitable state to anyone, and most certainly they are to President. And we were obviously going to be honored by a presidential visit to Texas, and we wanted one. The president had really not been to Texas since the campaign of 1960, except for the one stop in El Paso. So he'd not been there for any purpose during the intervening years, and we were obviously all going to benefit by his presence. We were all at that point we were Democrats, we were office holders. The fortunes of one obviously affected the fortunes of all, and it was important to all of us that he be understood, that he be accepted, that he be supported.
Now, he went to Texas after the El Paso thing. They started talking about it. So now when they went to El Paso, how many times you been to a place that's not super far away or you could easily have access to? If he has Air Force One, he could travel anywhere. But if you just go to a place and go, man, we should come here more often. Maybe that's how the idea became, and maybe that's where the speculation or where someone started to go, hey, Texas is a rough climate down there for Kennedy. Maybe we could set up something for something to happen. I don't know. That would be speculation on my part. I can just tell you what they show. This part right here would be, well, you were mentioning earlier about the way that they were interviewing Connally during the HSCA. This is Mr. Pryor. This is Stokes. Mr. Pryor's coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Connally and Ms. Connally, I know, as Mr. Devine said, that reliving this experience must be an emotional matter for you, and all who have watched you cannot help but admire your courage and the way you've done that. I don't know what the stories are that you referred to, Mrs. Connally, about your conduct after this, but anyone who heard you today certainly could have no questions about your courage and the character with which you faced it. I also think you brought back to us in dramatic ways of warmth and excitement of the Dallas reception, something that we've lost sight of through the years because of the way it ended in tragedy.
There's that, and then there's the opposing a motorcade by John Connally's testimony.
What was your view in opposing the motorcade in Dallas? You said there was a severe disagreement with the advancement on that subject.
Basically, my reasons for opposing the motorcade in Dallas were two. We were working the president very hard, I thought. Most people think that riding in a motorcade is easy. It's not. It's very tiring. It's exhausting. You assume that a person just riding along, so it shouldn't be any difficulty. But nevertheless, in a motorcade, the President of the United States is there. He's tense. He's smiling. He's exuding enthusiasm. He's trying to make, even in a fleeting second, he's trying to make contact with the thousands and tens of thousands of people that are along this parade route. And he's looking one side and then the other. And even if he just catches a human's eye for one fleeting second, there's a communication. And this is why in the car, Nellie and I had very little conversation with President Miss Kennedy. The conversations were extremely brief and desultory because he was in effect working the crowd from.
And then there's again, I don't understand this whole thing of like worried about the president's like energy levels when he should have been worried about security. But this is the motorcade route being published.
In fact, committed to a presidential visit sometime that fall, but the details certainly were not known then.
Did you recall that you released publicity at that time about the president's desire to come to Texas?
I don't believe there was any, but I could be wrong about that. I don't recall any.
You set no tentative schedule at that time. Was there any information at that time that a motorcade would or would not be used?
No, I don't think so, Congressman, no.
Mm-hmm. Was Dallas listed as one of the cities that might be visited?
I think from the very outset, from the time of the first announcement, which I don't think occurred that early, I think Dallas was listed as one of the cities, yes, as probably one of the cities that would be visited.
And then arguments on the motorcade, and then I'll play one more, and that's it.
I didn't know at the time. There was a big argument about whether we go to the women's building or the trademark. I didn't go to either one of them at the time. Most of these arguments arose at staff level, and then those that they couldn't settle, I'd finally hear about and get a hold of, and sometimes I'd just make a decision we were going to do thus and so, and sometimes I'd call somebody at the White House and get it worked out, but this went on constantly.
In any event, either building the motorcade would have had to go through some part of Dealey Plaza.
Well, I think, in any event, the motorcade certainly would have gone through downtown. It would not necessarily have had to go through Dealey Plaza, no, sir. If the women's building had been chosen, it could have gone another route. It probably would have gone another route.
That's the real tragedy. It should have gone to the women's building. This is that Frank Irwin call I just realized I should play.
Well, I'm just very much afraid that the governor ain't going to run for re-election. I don't think he's bluffing.
Well, I think that'd be the best thing could happen to him and to all of us if he didn't. If he's sick, doesn't feel like it, I'd just let the Wagner car run. If he's not happy and doesn't want to do it, not feeling good, that would suit me fine. I wouldn't beg him a minute. I think it's a terrible imposition. I wished I didn't have to run for this job. I may not run for it. I don't know how to get out of it. If I did, I wouldn't. If it's as easy for me as it is for him, I wouldn't be running. Because you can imagine how, if I spend this much time on Texas, how I'm handling the world. And I've got right at this moment a press conference at 3 o'clock. I've got Zanzibar. I've got Cyprus. I've got Panama. I've got a plane shut down in Berlin. And I've got all these things, and I'm talking to my best friend, begging him, please, not to get an opponent for a man that's supporting me.
And then the last but not least, hold on, this is going to play too.
And it's along the line of what information and how early the information would have been known as to the president's route. Lee Harvey Oswald went to work for the Dallas Book Depository on October the 15th, 1963. How soon after that, if you recall, Governor Connally, would he have known that the president was coming to Dallas?
He could have known it before that time, I suspect. I believe the time of the publication of the Baskin story in the Dallas paper was September the 26th. When the story first appeared, that November 21st and 22nd had been chosen as the dates of the president's visit.
Now, Connally did state that he does not believe that Oswald would have had that much advance notice. So if I type in Connally on my channel, again, recommending anybody listening to do this so you can just look at the clips for yourself. I'm not going to choose for you. But this is the...
He could have known precisely prior to that time because I don't think anyone knew.
So from your experience in Texas and national politics, wasn't that the normal parade route through Dallas that was taken? Have you been involved in other parades?
It's a normal and a logical route to take down Lemon to Turtle Creek and down, you could go down either Maine or Commerce, depending on what your ultimate destination was. But since we were going to the Trade Mart, it was a logical way to go, although we could have chosen one of the other streets that runs parallel to Maine and Commerce just as well. But probably we saw more people on the streets that we traveled.
Well, thank you once again for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, ending remarks from Rich, because I know you got a couple for me.
Well, I mean, I only got through April, and I go all the way to November, and all of these were lies.
How much time did you think we had for this? We had 2 hours in already.
Well, yeah. So I knew that I know nobody knows Evica's presentation better than me because I'm the one who transcribed it.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying point me to some sources.
So I'm telling you, I knew we probably wouldn't get it through this, but Evica ended that with what he called the deadly turns in Dealey Plaza. He exposed all those lies that Connally just said. She said that there's no documentary evidence whatsoever. Connally is the only source for a lot of those facts he just stated, and he contradicted himself throughout. Now, that thing about the 5 dinners, Gil Jesus has on his YouTube site a very short clip of Connally late in life. Like we're talking, he died in 93. This got to be like at least 1990, where he and Nellie are being interviewed. Short clip where Connally is saying this whole idea that there were five dinners planned, 5 fundraisers planned. Ridiculous. There were no 5 dinners planned. So he cannot keep his story straight
Well,
on any of it.
LBJ also says the thing, and so does Malcolm Kilduff about the dinners too. So I forget that. Played the Kilduff one for you.
They know Connally is lying. You got to realize that they know Connally's lying, and they're aligning themselves with Connally. I think all those instances where they are repeating Connally, and they even say they're repeating Connally, that's a political move. They think Connally is playing some good poker here. That this is insurance for him. First of all, to keep the conspiracy hidden through confusing it with all this disinformation, and secondly, with the threat that, the single bullet theory is crap. I got hit by a different bullet, which can only mean conspiracy. But he's playing both sides of it, and it's a message to the other conspirators that you mess with me and it all comes out. If anything happens to me, I've arranged for it to all come out. That's the same thing that happened with Cliff Carter and Billy Solistis making that tape. They were all blackmailing each other. But for Connally, his very life depended on that. He had to keep that threat going. And people, I never really considered that before, but you just proved to me that there were certain Connally people who aligned themselves. They knew that's what Connally was doing, and they aligned themselves with him, thinking he was going to be victorious with that he would eventually become president. And they were going to start aligning themselves with him right now. But what I wanted to say was, you can just go and read the whole workshop, word for word. If you want, we could do this at some other time, and I could get to the end of it. But I'm just doing the highlights here. But
I'll
I
have to
picked
go
highlights.
to link to the workshop below, and then I'll go read it, and we'll just do another one, I guess.
Yeah. So I knew I wouldn't have time to get through all this. I could have disproved right here everything Connally said. And Connolly's the only source for this. There is no documentary evidence. You say, well,
you had like a month to plan for this thing. You couldn't pick the clips you wanted to talk about and debunk and then send it to me, so I knew ahead of time.
Yeah, I didn't want to presume. I didn't want to dump a bunch of stuff, but I can send you this whole. I can send you what I'm holding here. I'll send you the email.
We're 2 hours in, and you're giving me this information. Come on, Rich.
I didn't know you wanted me sending you stuff. I'll be happy to send you stuff.
Yeah, sure, why not?
But yeah, the main thing is, I would, there's tons more.
I'm not saying you're wrong. There's a couple
in that
things
workshop. Evica said. No, what I'm saying, in the workshop himself, Evica would say he would be given a presentation on something, and he would say, "Okay, I've got 3 pages on this, but I only have time to give you a paragraph." So he gives us the paragraph. So I took that paragraph, and I'm only giving you a couple of sentences from it. I'm just giving you the highlights of the highlights of the highlights, but it's all there in his paragraph, based on the 3 pages, based on that paragraph. The whole workshop is like that because they're trying to get done with the workshop because they got to go down to Dealey Plaza for a candlelight ceremony that day. It was November 20th, 1993. It's the 30th anniversary, and he's kind of rushing himself. He says, "I've got 3 pages on this, but I'll only give you a paragraph." And my little thing here, all I put together was like just the bullet points of what that paragraph said. But you can, and I don't know where Evica had finished this. I mean, I don't know if it's book length or long essay or monograph, but I don't know where that is. It's somewhere in Evica's papers. He never got to publish it. But I would love to read those 3 pages rather than that paragraph. But everything Evica said about his research on this is in that transcript of that workshop. And if you really looked, maybe you could find the tape. I bought the tape from JFK Lancer, back in the 90s. And I don't know. I've never seen it.
I'll give it a look and I'll try and find what you're talking about.
But it may not exist anymore, and you have to wonder why. Why did Lancer bury this?
Well, I'll try and find it. We have to hit a wrapping point here because
So if you find the tape, listen to the tape. But you can just read the whole. You can read the whole transcript at my Substack.
I'm gonna link the rest of your links in the description below so people can be able to find your stuff, Rich. I always appreciate our chats. Like I said, I'm just not stating an opinion. I'm just trying to find something that clears up. We shouldn't have discrepancies over such small stuff of like planning of trips and who was there and who was not and all this. It's getting very, very confusing, and it's not easy for new researchers and people who are just looking into it. I've gotten way too many comments on the channel saying, what the hell what do I know about this? It's very, very difficult. And again, it takes years of research, but I feel like we can try and find a sliver that makes it easier for newer people.
Evica did those years of research, and Evica answers those questions.
Okay.
Evica figured it out. Evica figured it out.
Is it just Evica?
I don't know of any. Well, there are some other people that did it, but not to the extent that Evica did. Doug Horn in volume 4 of his series did it. I saw Lifton talking about it on the Education Forum. So there's probably going to be something in his book if it ever comes out about the trip planning. But yeah, several other several. Yeah, but the family has, a lot of they're talking about getting the book out.
Going to be able to organize his stuff.
But the thing is, Evica did stuff. Evica did this long research. Lifton did some research. Horn probably did some really excellent research. I haven't looked at that. I don't have his volumes. But other really top researchers have focused in on this trip planning. So it's not just Evica. And we will be hearing more about it. But nobody did it better than Evica that I've seen.
I'll send it to some people. We'll get Joe Green, me, you, and maybe find somebody else to do an Evica discussion about what he had. But I have to run. I told you 2 hours is the limit for Spotify. Rich, always appreciate the time. Your links will be in the description below. People, please check out Rich's other episodes. We always have good and back and forth banter. It's always a pleasure having Rich on the show. I always enjoy it. Good to see you again, my friend. And thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. And stay tuned for our next episode.